Hello everyone and welcome once again. In this section we are going to start with one of the interesting topics of GCP, that is the identity and access management. We also call it as IAM. Now let's quickly have a look at the learning objectives of this video. We'll start with the identity and access management overview, and then we will look at the key components of IAM. We'll also look at members, permissions and roles. Then we will have a demo around exploring the members, rules and permissions. And after that, we'll move to the service accounts, and we will also have a demo around these service accounts. Okay. And finally, how we wrap up the section with a discussion around use cases. We learned where do you use the IAM. Alright. Now let's have a look at overview of Cloud IAM. So Cloud IAM is one of the most critical resource of GCP that controls the access by defining who has what access to which role. Okay, as simple as that. Who has what access to which role. Now here, who represents the members, then what represents the roles, and which represents the permissions. Okay, so IAM is all about connecting all the dots together, right? Now, Cloud IAM is based on the principle of least privilege. It means that whatever the resource you create in GCP, any members of the team will not be having access by default. Okay. And IAM policy binds identity to roles which contains permissions. What it means that when you create any resource on the GCP, let's say you have created one resource on the GCP, nobody is having any access to this resource. Okay, your members can not directly access this resource. Okay, these members has to go through the pipeline, and that is the members has to get the access to the rules, and these rules are nothing but a set of rules, you can say. Let's say that these resources are your VMs that are running on GCP, and it is having financial application. So you create a role of financial applications, and in this role you define what are all the permission read, permission write permissions you want to give, or what are all the permissions you want to give. You just mention it in this role and you assign that role to the member. So the members cannot directly go to the resource, it has to go to roles to see what all the access they have to perform any action on this particular resource. All right. So the graphic in here will help you understand the concept in more better way. We have the roles and we have member identity. So member identity also called as principal, and the policy is the one that binds the member and the role together. So as you already know, roles are nothing but collection of permissions, and whenever any member want to get access to any resource, they have to be assigned to a role. So a storage admin or an instance admin role can be assigned to any of the users depending on their work area. All right. I will explain about all of this going forward. Now let's go one more step ahead and understand about this member identity or the users. So who can be the members? A Google account is one of the user. It will be having gmail.com extension with your username. That is a Google account user. Alright. There can be service account that can also be a user. More about this service account later. Then there can be a Google group. It can be a group of users that are having account in the Google. It can be G Suite domain, that is any organization having the G Suite domain is also considered as the user, can have many users in this, and when these users are requested access to a particular role, they will be given the access to this G Suite domain. Now, cloud identity domain. There are some users who create their domain on the cloud itself. They can also be considered as a user. The next is all authenticated users. It means that if you are using this alias on any particular resource, it means that all the users who are authenticated to sign in into that Google account will have the access to that particular resource. Okay, and there is all users. That means if anybody is having this alias access, it means that any anonymous person can access that particular resource. Okay, so there is a lots of flexibility that Google provides, which is some way or the other helpful for GCP users. Now let's understand about IAM permissions. So permissions determine the operations performed on a resource. Okay, what kind of operations you can perform on this resource, that is defined by the permissions, and this corresponds to 1:1 with the REST method on the GCP resource. It means that if there is a resource, there is a REST method that will be exposed by the resource to perform any kind of operation on this resource. So each GCP resource exposes a REST API to perform the operations. For example, let's say that you have a resource here and you want to publish something on this resource. So you must have this particular permission here that is exposed by this resource. That is, this resource has exposed a REST API and it will look something like this: pubsub.topic.publish. And if you want to publish something on this resource, you have to use this particular REST API method for publishing something on this particular resource. Now the permissions cannot be assigned directly to members, as we discussed earlier that there are resources and there are roles and there are members, right? So if you want directly to perform any operation on the resource by the members directly, that is not possible. It has to go through the rules, okay? And this will determine whether this user can perform any operation on this resource. One or more permissions are assigned to IAM role. That is, there can be n number of roles here. Let's say that this is a IoT role and this is storage admin role. So this one particular user can have as many roles as possible depending on the project requirement to perform operations on different kind of resource based on their role in the project. All right, so this is all about permissions. Now let's move one more step ahead and try to understand about IAM rules. So first of all, what are rules? Rules are nothing but a set of permissions that are grouped together and assigned to the role. Okay, so there are primitive roles which has three type of access: the owner, the editor, and the viewer. So whenever you create any resource, the owner has all the access to perform any kind of operations on this resource. They can delete this resource, they can modify, or they can perform any kind of operations on this resource. Editor can basically perform some restricted actions. Maybe they can edit the resource or add permissions or make any changes as per allowed operations. Now the viewer, basically it refers to the read only access. So they can only do the read operations. They cannot modify this resource. Okay. So the second type of role, that is predefined roles. So the predefined rules, basically it can be a pub sub publisher or a compute admin or a storage object admin roles. Okay, so these are the set of roles that are already defined by GCP. You cannot modify these roles. For example, the member with the compute admin role can perform the operations like create the compute engine, destroy it, or manage throughout its life cycle. And these are the predefined rules. We cannot edit these rules as these are defined by GCP. And the third type of role is the custom roles. It means that you can have a combination of certain kind of roles. For example, you want to create a role and you want to have certain kind of actions to be performed in that role. If you want to have the compute admin and the storage object admin role in this particular role, you can very well go ahead and create this custom role and assign it to a particular user or member, so they can perform certain kind of operations related to compute as well as storage. Okay, so this kind of service is also available with the GCP, so you can get a fine-grained access to the resource, and it is very much useful when you have a very big team and you want to assign certain kind of role, certain kind of members. For example, the DevOps team may require certain kind of role to perform operations. The developers may require a different set of roles. So you can create a custom role and assign that role to that particular team. Alright, so now having understood so many different concepts of Cloud IAM, it's time for us to combine them all together and learn about the key elements of the Cloud IAM that will be helpful in moving for the demo. So we have learned that there are something called resource here, and the resource can be any GCP resources which represent a project, or it can be a cloud storage bucket, or it can be a compute engine. So all these things we learned that these are resources. Okay, and to manage these resources we need set of permissions, and this permission is basically nothing but it determines the operations allowed on the resource. What kind of operations you can perform on these resources are determined by these permissions, and these permissions have a certain nomenclature, that is it will be defined in such a way that service dot resource dot the verb. For example, the compute.instance.insert permission determines that there is a permission to perform the insert operation, that is the user can create the compute engine. Similarly, the pubsub.subscription.consume, this kind of permission is used for performing any kind of publishing and subscribe task on a PubSub model. Now there are roles, that is nothing but collection of permissions, and the role are such that if you have the compute.instance.admin role defined for you, you can perform certain kind of actions on that particular resource. For example, you can start the VM, you can stop the VM, or you can delete the VM, and so on, right? And finally there is the user, that represents an identity. These are the people or the members of the team or the DevOps team or the developer team that represent the identity. It can be in the form of a Google account or Google group or GC domain and so on. Okay, so it's very important for us to understand the difference between all these four key components, that is resource, permissions, roles and users. When we see it, we should be able to determine what is what. So you can spend some time in understanding all these key components. So now it's time to move to my favorite part, which is the demo part. So in this demo, we will learn about roles and how do we create a role and how do we attach that role to a particular member, or in this case, we call it as a principal. So I am on my Google Cloud Platform console, and I will go to the search and I will type IAM. I am an admin, and in here we are onto IAM console, and we can see the list of users that are already there here. So here you will see the principal. This is nothing but the name of the accounts, or maybe this is my personal account, this is a Google service account. So these all will be principals, and you can see the roles in here. What is the role of this particular principal? It's a editor. You can see the owner in front of my name. That means that I am the owner of this account and I can perform any actions on my account. Okay, so first of all, how do we create any role? So as we already discussed, the roles are basically the group of permissions that we assign to a particular person, right? Let's say that I want to create a role for my project that will only be assigned to the developers of my project. So I will go ahead and create a role and I will name that as a developer role, so that if a new developer comes to my project, I will just assign that role and he will get the access to all the resources that are required for him, right? So I will name it developer Java role. Description, you can add any. I will keep it as it is, and the role ID I will keep it as Java developer role 1, and launch state I will keep it as alpha. Now it's time for us to add the permissions. What all the permissions we want to assign to this particular Java developer. I will assign the role that are useful in creating the storage. So compute admin storage, this role I will be using, and I have filtered it based on the compute admin storage, and I will get the list of permissions that can be added to this particular role. There are 77 roles that can be performed. So what all action your user wants to perform, you can just check that I want to compute this create, then or we can provide a delete, access and list. Let's say that these are particular permissions we are assigning to this storage admin. If we want, we can go ahead and add some more roles related to a compute engine as well, but this is just an example. You can go ahead and add as many roles as you want, create it, your new role is created, and you can see Java developer role. You can go and check the permissions, what role the permission this role has, and now you can go ahead and assign this role to any of the users you want, right? So let me go to the IAM console, and these are my users. If I want to add more users to the list, I can just go ahead and add the principal. So I can name anything. So this principal will be your user or the service account or the G Suite account, right? So let me give my other email address. That is okay. So this is my other email account. I have given it here, and I will select the role from this drop down. So I can filter out the role that I have just created. So custom role that I have created is Java developer role. I will assign this to this particular user and I will save it. After saving it, you will see that this new user will come here and you can see the role that is assigned to this user. So suppose tomorrow if this user is leaving the organization, I just have to delete it. If this user is moving to some other project, I will have to assign some other role to this particular user, right? So it's designed in such a way that it's loosely coupled, it is not having any dependency, or and it is very highly scalable. So that's one of the best use of IAM permissions. All right, now that was a very comprehensive demo on IAM account. It's time for us to understand about service accounts. So what are service accounts? It's a special Google account that belongs to an application or VM. Means that it's a account that is associated with any VM. Let's say that you have a virtual machine here and there are other applications deployed on the cloud, right? So these applications talk to each other internally. So how do these communicate with each other? It has to be linked to some account, and this is nothing but the service account, and this is used for communicating with other resources programmatically, right? So the service account is identified by a unique email address. So basically this email address will be very unique and it might be automatically generated using your unique identifiers, maybe the project name or the project organization name. Combining all of this, it will form a unique email address for communication with each other. Okay, and service account are associated with key pair used for authentication. So it will be having a key pair that will be used for authentication programmatically for interacting with other resources. And there are two type of service accounts. One is the user managed and other is the Google managed. So basically when you are creating any resource on the GCP, there will be a service account that will be created automatically by Google, and that will be called as the Google managed service account. As in the last demo I showed you, these two I did not generate. These are generated automatically by Google Cloud, and it is having the extension gserviceaccount.com, right? And it is having a unique identifier. So whenever you create a project, there will be some accounts that will be created and it will be assigned some default role, in this case editor, that will be used for performing communication between different VMs or engines. Okay, and the another one is the managed user. So basically managed user is the one that we create and assign it some role so that it can be used as a service account for accessing the resources programmatically. All right, and the last is each service account is associated with one or more roles, right? It will be having at least one role and you can go ahead and add more roles so that it can perform the task very easily. So I hope this will be very much clear what are service accounts. Now let's have a small demo where we will explore more about service accounts. Okay, as we discussed earlier, this is the service account that was created automatically. We have not created it. Okay, if you go here at the left side tab, you will see a section of service account, right? In the service account, you will be able to see all the accounts that are available. This was automatically created and it shows the compute engine default service account, right? Now if you want to create your own personal service account that you want to attach it to any of the VMs and want to use this service account for communication with other resources on GCP, you can very well go ahead and create a service account, and you have to follow some steps for creating this service account. So the name of the service account, I want to perform some DV operations programmatically, so I will name it as DVS service. Okay, so this DVS service automatically took the account ID and it has extended that with the project name that is here and with IAM serviceaccount.com, right? If you want, you can give description, then you have to create and continue. This is the first step. The second step will be to assign it some role, right? So a DBA service will be required to perform roles related to storage services, right? So I have to select a role for this service account. Role that I will select is the cloud storage admin role. Okay, so role is added. Now in the third step, grant user access to this service account. This is the optional field and we don't have to do anything here. It will internally have some certificate that will grant the access for communicating with other GCP resources. So when you click on done, your service account will be created. As you can see in the dashboard, This is the service account that we just created and its name is DVS service. So this service account is created successfully. When you go to the dashboard, you will be able to see that service account in here, and you can also see that a role storage admin is assigned to this particular service account. So I hope this will be clear how to use the service account. It's time for us to understand where to use the IAM services. So to share GCP resources with the fine-grained control, we use the IAM, right? To selectively allow or deny permission to an individual resource, we use IAM. And to define custom roles that are specific to a team or organization. This we can achieve by setting up custom roles, and along with that the Google provides some predefined roles that are the primitive roles and the custom roles that we define, and we can achieve a lot using these two roles. Enable authentication of application through service accounts that we just saw in the quick walkthrough, where we enable the authentication for communicating between the GCP resources using a service account. So this was the summary of what we have learned, and this completes the session on IAM. I hope you have learned a lot from this section. So if you have learned something from this video today, I request you to subscribe to my channel, because that gives me motivation to make us more videos like this. And with that, see you in the next section. Thanks for watching.